Well, good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the noon meditation and to what is certainly an unbelievable Memorial Day weekend. Lots of picnics and barbecues and outstanding weather, to say the least. A very special weekend, and I would like to entitle this noon meditation, Remembering to Remember. Remembering to Remember. Not just remembering, but remembering to remember. I think memory and remembering is the most central concept of true spiritual growth, the most vital concept of spiritual growth. Without the memory, we are just a result of our past actions and kind of mindlessly go from one piece of karma to the next, from one inclination of things to the next. Whether that be happy, whether that be sad, whether it be neutral, whether it be painful, whether it be pleasurable, all we would be without memory and putting things together is just a series of going through the motions, sometimes up, sometimes down, but with a sense of non-direction. Now this Memorial Day has always, of course, been set aside for, and it has its equivalent in every country, to honor the past soldiers and men and women who have fought to defend countries, and other people who have also been a part of past war efforts, whether I suppose it's offensive or defensive. And these are not political statements that I'm going to be making, and I don't intend them on a Memorial Day weekend to sound unpatriotic at all, for I certainly believe individually that the United States is the true spiritual center of the world, and will become even more so in the years ahead. And I find it a very, very special and wonderful country. Certainly I would not choose to live anywhere else. So I'm not trying to sound unpatriotic with a few comments I make. Because spiritually speaking, it's very important really to know who we are, and to know equally, of course, who we are not. I want to take a slightly different perspective on patriotism carefully, and that's somewhat of a psychological perspective, which is unavoidable because I'm a psychiatrist and I look at everything that way. A little monotonous sometimes, but it's important to understand, and I want to mention something briefly about wars. I think wars can belong in noon meditations. There's certainly been a major part of world history, I'm sure, on every plane, especially the earth plane. Certainly wars come about as human beings externalize their conflicts. How often do we see movies, television programs, where the enemy always seems to be on the outside, the enemy is clearly defined, and it's always, and we really tend to get involved in it, whether it's a Rambo kind of character, for any of you who saw Rambo 3 since it's been released on Wednesday. Not quite as good as Rambo 2, but lots of action. Anyway, it's always easier to have an external enemy. And that enemy psychologically is someone that we're projecting our own conflicts onto. When the conflicts, of course, both psychologically and in the most truest sense, spiritually, those conflicts are inside of us. And it's actually a fairly kind of primitive psychological defense mechanism to externalize those conflicts. One of the most extreme ways that this comes about is certainly when someone has a defense of paranoia, where they think that all the problems on the outside, the enemies from the outside, all the danger is from the outside, and they organize their lives as a means of protecting themselves from the outside, from these outside forces who want to undermine, who want to destroy, who want to subvert, who want to take control. Usually when individuals have a significant amount of paranoia, they're really just at the point before a very severe nervous breakdown. It's like one of the last-ditch efforts to make the mind think, to make the individual think that the trouble is from the outside. And so we direct these conflicts to the outside. It's very easy. Who's ever listened to the good rhetoric of a politician, or I have a CD at home of John Philip Sousa music that is really wonderful. He has great marches, but boy, you start hearing that music and your feet start going like this, and you don't want to go into the battle, but it does something physically to really kind of get you going. As I have a quote here, this is an original quote, I kind of like it with the message I would like to get across this morning. When the military music plays, it's very hard not to march. Kind of like that. Anybody can use it, you can take credit for it. When the military music plays, it's hard not to march. It really, in such a subtle way, gets into our unconscious, activates our unconscious, stimulates the lower kinds of chakras, the Martian chakra, the Saturn chakra, the Jupiter chakra, to really start us marching and to get us think that, hey, there really is an enemy out there. There really is a conflict out there meaning really outside of us. When what happens psychologically is we really begin to regress as children to parental figures who are politicians and military leaders. Again, being very taken in by the music and the rhetoric, and very important, being taken out of the struggle that regularly goes on without us, with inside of us. Because to fight an external enemy, it's always so much easier than fighting the most difficult enemy, and I mean this in quotes, and I'll explain a little bit. It's the most difficult enemy of all. The force that's most difficult, the force that's most threatening, which is the forces that go on inside ourselves, that go on inside our mind, that go on inside our unconscious. But political and military leaders will tell us how glorious it is in death and victory. And in a psychological way, if you really apply group dynamics to this, they are really relieved the more battles there are, as those battles are either won and lost. It like burns up their anxiety, you might say. And we act more as kind of one entity, if you look at this in terms of a systems theory. So it's very important to understand really who we are. What if we aren't Americans? What if we aren't United States citizens? What if we aren't black or white or Jews or Catholics or Irish or men and women? Spiritually speaking, it's very important to remember what we are. We are none of those things. As Kriyananda has brought up so many wonderful times, if you take on the identity of the group karma, which is perhaps a certain stage of spiritual development, from having no sense of identification at all, to a process of identifying really with a group because of an inability that we have within ourselves to identify with ourselves, later to identify then really as, which is a much harder task, individually. But when we identify with a group karma, well, as the group karma gets good, we're victorious, we're wonderful, it feels great to be an American, an Irishman, a Catholic, a woman, a man, whatever it happens to be. And when the karma goes down, well, boy, it's so difficult and we have all this pain, when none of that, spiritually speaking, really was us. It was like linking on to the group karma bandwagon and being in a very confused spiritual state that we are that piece of group karma, when that's not us. This is where I think the theory and idea of reincarnation really is so valuable. I mean, maybe last lifetime, who knows, maybe we were Irishmen, maybe we were Jewish, maybe we were Catholic, maybe we were Japanese, maybe we were Shinto, maybe we were Muslims. Really, anything, it all can happen, so how can you take on, in the oversense, so much identity in this lifetime, really, for what we are? Because it'll change next lifetime again, very likely. Maybe we'll be a man next time, or a woman next time, or maybe we'll be on another plane of existence. Maybe we'll be a Martian or a Venusian. But there's a spiritual difficulty in over-identifying really with the group, with, I think, the part of spiritual life that needs so much work, being comfortable enough to identify ourselves as individuals. Then it even gets to more abstract levels when we first identify with our personality and later begin to go beyond that to a much deeper identification. I personally believe that the technique of meditation will never spread worldwide to billions and billions and billions of people. I think it's a frightening experience to people who are at a certain level of involvement, who would much rather have their eyes open and have a large sense of a community. When you have as the central technique of this is one technique of spiritual life, and this is all my own opinion, certainly, the process of sitting in a meditative state, closing our eyes, going inside ourselves, where we really have to be alone with ourselves. It's really not a public ritual to do. Enlightenment is really not a public path. It's an extraordinarily individual, fantastic, but idiosyncratic individual path. It's a little bit lonely, and people can be oftentimes very uncomfortable with it. Would rather have the group experience, feeling safety within a group. Now, it's not a matter of bad or good. It's a matter of what different karmic levels that people are at, what level of involvement they have to be. It's not a matter of good, bad, I'm better, this is not so good, I'm advanced, these people are primitive. No. I'm not talking about this on any kind of an ego level at all. Because what's also important to understand karmically is that we don't start all at the same time, our spiritual pathway. But it's very important then to remember really who we are and to not over-identify with this group karma experience. But it happens so easily, it happens so readily. How can it happen, I mean, just naturally, just in a reflexive way? Well, it's like, I think a river really is a very good analogy. If you look at the Mississippi River or so, if you've ever taken a drive out to Galena, a beautiful area in northwest Illinois, and go a little farther into Dubuque and just kind of watch the river for a little bit, you have a main current to the river, and then you have all these different kind of eddy currents or kind of minor currents that may go off the side and see some kind of swirling motion. But is something that's going down the river, is that really the river? Is that really a part of the river? You almost begin to think you're part of a river, yet you're simply being carried along by the river. The difficult spiritual task gets to be in trying to override what seems to be a very natural and reflexive identification. So we don't begin to think that we are the river. And so we can continue the question, hey, wait a minute, whose struggle is this? Whose group karma is this? If I identify with group karma, well, this incarnation it may be great, but next incarnation, first the victors are the victors, and the next time they're the losers, and the next time they're the victors, and one goes up and down really in the karmic cycles. About 2 weeks ago, there was a fascinating program on Channel 11 on PBS. Frontline they've been having a series on Japan, a country that at least from a kind of a spiritual and social sense, I've had tremendous admiration for. And this really has shaken up a lot of the ways that I've kind of saw that I idealized Japan. This one program that many of you may have seen perhaps about 3 weeks ago was on Americans living in Japan. And in one section of the program, they were interviewing a group of middle management people from Mitsubishi, middle management, Japanese that is. And this was taken about, the interview was about 8 or 9 o'clock at night, and they were all having kind of dinner together really at the office and socializing. There were about maybe 8 men there. And there was an American interviewing them, and a Japanese who was also helping in the interview doing translations. And the American interviewer was kind of saying, well, you people work so hard. What kind of hours do you keep? Tell me about vacation. And they kind of turned around, looked at each other, and said, well, their regular hours are from 7 o'clock in the morning till 10 o'clock at night, 6 days a week, Monday through Saturday. And they take Sundays off. And the interviewer said, what do you do on Sunday? The guy said, sleep. Well, of course, who wouldn't sleep? And he said, well, he really missed, and this is the group of them who all had different comments, they do miss having dinner with their family, because they only had dinner with their family once a week. But after all, this is very much worth it, because we're going to beat that next company. We're going to outcompete We're going to put that other Japanese company really to shame. We're going to win, and that's what the struggle's about. And he said, the interviewer asked, well, how many days of vacation have you had over the last couple of years? And the guy kind of stopped for a second after the translation was made and said, well, 2. He said, you've had 2 days of vacation in 2 years? He said, yeah. And well, why so little vacation? He said, well, why bother with vacation? And then the most interesting part of the interview came when the interviewer said, well, what about your own individual dreams? And they kind of looked kind of stunned. And when they turned to the interviewer, he said, could you please, they didn't look like they understand. Tell them I'm asking the question, what about your own individual dreams? And the interviewer said, there really isn't a word in Japanese for individual dreams. And these people really didn't quite know what they were talking about. And the Japanese said, no one's ever asked us that before. We've never thought about that before. That's a fascinating question. It really kind of took my breath away, I know, when I heard that. Because there got to be such identification with the company. I mean, where the company is the family, the company is the way of life. And certainly the way that they prove themselves to the world financially and in terms of their productivity in business, they're certainly the world economic leader, the world industrial leader. What about your individual dreams? Oh, that's very interesting. No one's ever asked us that before. We've never thought about that. One can get to be in such a, and that's like a group karma, or what I'm talking about, a group karmic momentum. That's like being in the middle of the Mississippi River. Well, the question of really where you're going and where you're carrying, is this where you want to go? It really doesn't even come up. I mean, the river's just going along and you're going along with the river and you're kind of thinking that you're a part of the river and forget, spiritually speaking, that you're apart from the river and really not the river. Even though that momentum it's the river's momentum, it's not your momentum. Because it's also true in actually 2 countries where psychoanalysis really hardly has any kind of a foothold at all. The technique of psychoanalysis is the Soviet Union and Japan. And that's because in the case of the Soviet Union, there's a central Marxist concept, of course, that it's the group, it's society that's really important, and the individual is secondary to that. Psychoanalysis serves to help develop the individual, and it's just so conflictual with Marxist philosophy that, well, it's a reason why Freud is banned. He's not banned because he was Jewish. It doesn't have to do with the Jewish-Russian problem. It has to do with conceptually, it's as anti-Marxist as you can have, the development of the individual. And then in Japanese, of course, there's the same sense that there's really, and this is also my own opinion, very little sense of the individual in Japan. It is very much of a group effort, a very balancing effort. They interviewed some ball players later in the program, Americans who had gone over there to play baseball, and said the average ball player, although they're paid well, can only last there a couple of years. It drives them crazy because there's such a sense of, they don't want an individual excelling, someone who really hits more and more home runs as the season goes on. They're not cheered on. Once they get too far ahead of someone else, they're really very much kind of put down and taken out of the lineup, which just baffles these guys. These guys says, hey, I'm hitting 500, I've got 36 home runs, and it's only a quarter way into the season. They aren't interested in individuals. It's a very, very extraordinarily high-pressure cooker society from my psychological perspective as a psychiatrist, which doesn't promote the individual at all. It disdains individuality and promotes the group effort. And anything else is really threatening and put off and put aside. And what spiritual life is about, as I see it, certainly is the development of the individual. Not the individual personality, it goes beyond that. But we really have to, and where I'm tying it in here to memory, remember what is the pathway? What group karma are we going on? Can't we better remember really who we are and where that sense really comes from? Knowing that psychologically speaking, again, it's easiest to to link up with the external. It's easiest to have an external enemy. A very close friend of my wife's, her father is a civil engineer, an extremely successful civil engineer in Marin County in California. And he made a fortune when he was really quite young as a civil engineer in this earthquake area. He was tied in with politicians and all that. But what he's been doing for the last 15 years is kind of following wars around the world and identifying really with the underdogs of that war and spending a lot of time in helping the underdogs, living for a while in Vietnam. He works about 8 months a year now in both Nicaragua and Honduras. And he just kind of, he really can't live outside of war zones. He needs to be a part of a war zone. It tells you what kind of conflicts are regularly going on with him, that he needs to be a part of wars and needs to follow wars around. Because again, wars are really a projection of our conflicts that we externalize. It's important to remember, what is our karma? What are our battles? What is our memory and what is someone else's memory? How much of the memory that we have is it really our memory and our experience? Or is it the memory or experience of a family member or a group family? How much is the memory of our race? How much is the memory of our religion, of our culture? There are all sorts of different layers of memory. And if there's any advantage, I suppose, to being that individually I've never identified really with any kind of an ethnic group or social or cultural group. I'm a third or fourth generation here and don't have any strong ties to any old country in Europe. Maybe it's been a little bit easier, I think, to be able to see that in an emotional way. I don't feel particularly emotionally tied into Germany or to Holland, which are the countries of some of my ancestors. And maybe that makes it sometimes a little easier to have this more of an identification as an individual and really not the group karma. Because how we remember, and once we are able to take our memory and isolate our memory for, what is the memory of ourselves? Are these someone else's battles I'm fighting? What really are my battles? You really get to understand more and more the importance of individual memory. When I was in medical school, there was a neurologist that I worked with at Press St. Luke's who told me about a patient he was so fascinated with he went to see. I hope this doesn't sound too ghoulish. It was about 25 years ago that he went to see this person to talk about the importance of memory. There was a gentleman in New York City who had a case of intractable epilepsy, who would go into seizures, many of them a day, every day, and this person had been on, this was again back in the 1950s, had been on maximum doses of various anticonvulsants, everything that they had back then, and this person really couldn't work or couldn't function at all because he was having seizures all the time, had a terrible, terrible epileptic condition, a seizure disorder. So what they decided to do back then with his consent is to do a special test where they do mappings to the brain to find out where does the epileptic focus come on? Where does the seizure actually start from? And maybe if surgically, if they could cut those out, maybe the person would be free of the seizures, or certainly it'd be easier to control. And the part of the brain that the seizures were coming from, the seizure focus, was called the hippocampus. Now, importantly enough, where I'm bringing it in here with memory, the hippocampus is a part of the brain that's involved in converting short-term memory to long-term memory, about changing from an electrical configuration of physical memory to a chemical memory, which is the permanent kind of memory that we can have. And so what they took this guy into surgery, I guess it was about 1958, and they surgically removed both the hippocampi. He had a bilateral hippocampectomy. Now, as you might expect, when he came out of surgery, as we had hoped, his seizure disorder was gone for the first time in his life. However, there was a new problem, actually, that got to be very, very serious, is that he had no ability to lay down any new memory because he lost the brain's converting system of short-term memory to long-term memory. So what happened is, because of actually how much the hospitalization cost him, is he had to move to a smaller house after the surgery. But when he would leave work after he got out of the hospital, went back to work, which was, of course, he could only go to the same job. Every night he would go back to his own house, the original house, and would try to get in. And the people who bought his house really were very friendly and very nice, saying, no, I know you don't remember. You moved out of here a couple of years ago. He said, oh, okay, and they write down the address for him, and he really has to look at that about every couple minutes, otherwise he forgets that they gave him the list. This almost sounds like a Twilight Zone episode, I know. And then something kind of awful about it is that his a very close uncle of his had died shortly after his surgery. And he would be at home regularly, like having dinner with his wife and family, and he'd say, hey, how's Uncle Bill doing? And his wife said, oh my gosh, I know we've gone over this many, many times. Uncle Bill had a heart attack and died. Oh, and he becomes very sad. It's like hearing it for the first time. He breaks down. And it's like this every week, month after month after month, with no ability to remember. I mean, it's certainly a spiritually catastrophic state. But shows you what happened when, in this extreme condition, when we can't remember. And that's really, in a different way, what spiritually happens when we don't put enough awareness into life, when we really don't remember. How many of the same kind of karmic problems tend to revolve around? Well, here we are again. Here we're doing it the same way, and then it's away from a while. Now here it's the same way again. And I find this in myself. I'm sure you must find it of yourselves. How many things are just happen again and again and again and again, where something doesn't link up, or we don't seem to remember enough. Because unless we remember, we can't change behavior. If we can't change behavior, we're just a victim of like karmic robots going through our life, just repeating the same kind of action, whether that be pain, loss, gain, happiness, sadness. The emphasis is not on whether it's a good experience or bad experience, but it's the same thing over and over again. Memory is the single most crucial, important aspect in the spiritual life. Two parts of memory that we know are very involved in laying down memory are certainly our motivation level. Our motivation really has to be high. The higher the motivation, the more we can remember. And also, of course, presentation of material that's interesting, that kind of grabs us in some way. Now, both of those are very important to look at, I think, spiritually. High motivation and presentation of material that's interesting. Motivation certainly relates to how excited we are about being in the world, how curious we are. And I think that concept of curiosity is a very, very important one. That we need to do things in order to keep ourselves curious enough, happy enough, alert enough, in order to keep that motivation level high. Because I think it's certainly true, as I've been involved in psychiatry for some time now, I certainly can make a statement. I think most people are nowhere near kind enough to themselves. People are generally on the more depreciating end, depriving end, kind of hostile end, whether that comes from a lot of our puritanical roots in the United States, or a lot of denial. But so many people, I think, are so unkind and unbelievable taskmasters to themselves, unforgiving to themselves. That's certainly going to influence our motivation. It certainly is going to influence our memory, our initiative, and our curiosity, because if so many times, spiritually speaking and psychologically speaking, we're always beating ourselves down, beating ourselves down, beating ourselves down, we're going to start to space ourselves out as a response to that, become more distant from it, and become a lot more dull, which can be a real spiritual problem. So, emphasizing the positive aspects of that, we have to reinforce our positivity. I think it's very important that when we find a piece of music, a video, a movie that really gets us feeling really very good, some music that really kind of fires us up, not in just an emotionally charged way, but in a peaceful alertness kind of way, I think that's the record to buy. I think that's the video to rent. I think that's the movie to go see, or to have someone make a tape of it for you or so. We need to take advantage of anything that can help induce a very positive state to really keep our motivation level high. That's when we remember the most. To keep our curiosity very, very high. We need to be able to activate what I would call PAT, positive associational tracks. Now, this concept of associations is really very simple in psychology. It means that there's much like a piano, when you press any C note, it tends to reverberate all the other C notes. It tends to reverberate octaves of the same kind of frequency. So when we do something positive really within ourselves, we tend to associate and activate other kinds of positive feelings, building to a very positive state. Because it's very important for you to understand that we can't force ourselves to be motivated. We can't fight ourselves to be motivated. We really have to, and this is somewhat of a difficult abstract concept to explain, we really have to work with ourselves. You really have to look at your mind, your body, your memory track as something outside of you. You really have to look at it as objectively as you can, and that you can only drive it so far. You can't drive in good feelings. You can't drive in motivation. You have to be able to work with it and let it happen. You have to see, well, let's see, what is it like? It meaning, your body-mind complex. What does it like? What doesn't it like? Now, self-discipline is very important. I'm not suggesting that you simply then do whatever the body and mind really likes. There has to be a good level of organization about it, but you have to work with it in a more positive way without identifying with it overly so, because spiritually speaking, we are not our physical vehicle. Yet our physical vehicles are immensely important, of course. It's an understatement. We are not our personality. We are not our mind. That's a very, very abstract thing to walk around trying to realize and trying to work with. Very, very difficult not to identify with it. Yet it's very interesting when you can find yourself, let's say, in a more negative mood, because it's more likely to come up perhaps in a negative mood, and to have the thought come up saying, the mind is upset, the mind is angry, the mind isn't feeling very good, the mind is having a bad day. It's not you. It's an extraordinarily sophisticated, wonderful tool, but a tool nonetheless, and not to confuse the tool with a force that's working the tool. Very, very abstract, but there's an important spiritual message in here. Even in one section of the Gita, I found a stanza out of the Gita where an Arjuna talking with Krishna also talks about, hey, don't be so harsh on yourself, essentially. There's actually two ones. The first goes like this, and this is Krishna speaking. Souls who practice extreme austerity do so through ego and hypocrisy. They go beyond what the yogic law requires. They are possessed of attachment, pride, and desire. He who torments the organs of the body, know also he torments me. By extreme austerity, nothing can be solved. Such souls are ignorant and of demonic resolve. In Kriyananda's translation. Again, to beat ourselves down just to say, well, now you got to work on this, and now you've got that done, well, you got to work on this, without being kinder to ourselves, rewarding ourselves, is really missing the very spiritual boat, because sooner or later the body's going to revolt, the mind's going to revolt. You have to work with it really like a child, that you just can't force it. When my 11-week-old son has had enough to eat, even though I have that bottle, and there's no way that I can get a drop down him. Even at 11 weeks, the arms are going all over the place, and the head is going like this, and he has to win. You can't force it. You have to be able to work within it, which takes a little more time, a different angle, and a little more patience. Even the misunderstandings of Buddhism. I had a psychologist a friend who had just finished a group, and he says, yeah, we talked about um, a Buddhist principle today. I said, and this was coming out of a Jewish psychologist. And I said, oh, is that right? What is that? He says, yes, life is anguish. I said, huh? Life is anguish. Life is suffering. Well, that's the first noble truth, right? And I said, well, not quite. I said, and I don't pronounce Pali well, but the three words that life is supposed to, it goes something like, life is aninka, ananka, dukkha. And dukkha, which is what I believe the word that has been vastly misunderstood and misinterpreted as life is suffering. I said, well, it's meant that if you understand that the ultimate goal of a spiritual life is a tremendous degree of self-awareness, a very positive, contented state, a balanced state where one is not subject to the ups and downs of karma, and if you try to find that kind of feeling through karmic things in the world, through things that have beginning and things that have an end, you're not going to find it. And you may be, and you certainly will be very unhappy to think that just the externals in the world will give you this feeling. He said, what? I said, well, let me try a little bit differently. Life is a wonderful place. Life is a very good place. I said, in Buddhism, as in yoga as well, you can only find enlightenment really on the earth plane. This is a great place. This is the only place that you can find enlightenment. And it's misinterpreted to say that, well, since if you just follow the senses, if you just follow the world and the world goes up and down and your moods go up and down, there's nothing evil about the world. There's nothing bad about that. It's simply just the nature of things. Things come and go. Anything that's born will die. Even though it's also true is anything that dies will be born again. But it doesn't have any kind of a permanency. The permanency really is to be gained in a more spiritual state of identifying back with ourselves to remember who the dreamer is and not to confuse the dream with the dreamer. It's a very positive place. The world is extremely positive. Curiosity is one of the most important and vital spiritual feelings to be able to share. Life is not suffering at all. Spiritual life is about goodness. What I like, Kriyananda has made the comment so many times that I really enjoy, like when I go on to the Art Institute, looking at the Far Eastern collection of paintings and of statues. What really is true, he says, Eastern saints are generally fairly happy. They're not suffering, anguishing, they're not being tortured, they're not being martyred in the same kind of way. And I'm saying this having grown up Catholic. Saints are positive. Saints are together people. Spiritually evolved people are happy people, are contented people, are not the sackcloth and ashes really type. The world is a positive place. The Buddha is smiling. There are always those great, very subtle smiles when you see these statues and paintings of come from Thailand and India, Nepal, of the Buddha in meditation. It's not a concentrated, overly involved, hard expression that the Buddha has. It's a little smile. Now, he's not going out of his mind saying, whoopee! It's not wild and ecstatic, but it's very still. It's very still, but the smile's there, because the concept in yoga is santosha. Santosha is contentment, even more specifically, positive contentment. I think positive contentment is something different from happiness, because positive contentment to me implies a sense of exciting curiosity, but not where you're driven by it. But it's nothing that you also have to force either. It's always there, positive contentment, santosha. That's what the spiritual life is about. That's how you really know that you're on the spiritual path. Your life should get better. There should be better things happening to you. There should be more things in the world that you enjoy. Not suffering, not denial. And so it's important, as Krishna talks also in the Gita, that yoga is not for he who sleeps too little. It's not about suffering. Of course, not for he who also sleeps too much. It's a balanced state. When we would sleep fast, when we would food fast, it's not for the point of suffering. It's not for the point of atoning for sins, using old Catholic terms. It's for the point of self-discipline, but self-discipline that has a very positive sense to it. Because there's a very special psychological, spiritual state that happens when one food fasts. As you become a little more detached, as the emotions greatly settle down, because emotions are always linked to food. And the idea is not to get away from the emotions, but to understand what emotions really, what part they play in your life, so you can make your decisions a little bit better. As Kriyananda says, one way to find out if you're really going to take a big, big step in your life, to find out if you really do want it, how do you know if you want it? How do you know, well, is this really good for you? Is it necessary? How do you know really deep inside, is something really good for you? Is this something that you should do? He said, do a sleep fast for 2 or 3 days. Do a food fast for 2 or 3 days and see if you still want it. Let the emotional part settle down in order that the feeling element, not to become neutral, because the Buddhas, the way they show that positive feeling sense is in that nice smile. Little smile, very subtle, but very much there. See if you still want it. If one wants to move to a different part of the country, if you want to change careers, if you want to have children, if you don't want to have children, if you want to get married, major changes that happen in your life. If you still want those after a sleep fast or food fast, chances are that really is a good indication that it may be the right thing for you after the feelings and after the emotions settle down. A very important principle to understand. Religion is a very good thing. Religion should make us happy. Religion should make us enjoy things more. It should bring across this concept of contentedness more and more often. It's a very positive state. Even Shelley had made a statement when I was at his house one time with a group of other disciples, and he was talking about breathing Kriya, and he made a statement which was so simple, yet so practical in this concept of really working with yourself and not forcing yourself to do things, because you'll eventually, you can't force a child, you can't force a teenager, you can't force your own unconscious either. You can't drive anything in. He said, when you breathe your Kriya, or when you do your meditation, stop breathing the Kriya just before it starts to get boring. Very important. He said, stop meditating, because people say, well, when I breathe Kriya, I should sit down and do it for 108 times, right? I should sit down and lock myself into a full lotus position, and I'm going to sit there for 3 hours and I'm not going to move an inch. He says, you know how long that technique's going to last? Not even 1 day. He said, you know how easy you're going to forget not to meditate the next day? Or, well, gosh, I should meditate, but I got to really take care of these bills, and I got to go out and walk the dog. And he said, you'll find all sorts of excuses. And you know what's going to happen then? Then you're going to start getting mad at yourself for coming up with these excuses. He said, you got to go back to what happened initially. He said, you were forcing yourself way too much. You were trying to meditate beyond the point of happiness, so there didn't get to be negative feelings, but it got to be too much work. And as soon as something becomes too much work, you're going to find out ways of avoiding the work, because work is forced and it brings out associations of past authoritarian figures, trying to force, not really working with you. He said, where you have to stop meditating is while you're still feeling good, while that feeling is there. That's when you should stop. Because if you leave it with a positive feeling, you're going to go on the next day, and he said, you'll see something incredible happen within a week or two. I said, yeah, what's that? He said, you'll find other times to meditate. The thought will come up, hey, I got a couple minutes here on kind of a break. I don't have to sit down for 3 hours and do my 50,000 breathing kriyas. He said, you'll find a few moments to go into yourself, to balance yourself, just for the briefest time. And he said, that'll have more positive spiritual and psychological development. It'll have more benefits than all that sitting down for an hour and I'm going to meditate for 1 solid hour through 5 incense sticks and all that. He said, it'll come up spontaneously. And he said that attitude, that very positive, eager, curious attitude will spread. And he said, you'll find all sorts of time to meditate, and the meditation will naturally prolong itself, will naturally happen in increasing frequency and increasing length. Not because it's forced, but because it feels good, and feeling good and having a positive experience promotes more and more of the same happening. And that's, he said, how you really get on the spiritual pathway and the positive spiritual momentum. You'll find reasons to spend more time picking up the Gita or any kind of spiritual text that you happen to enjoy. You'll find time for a little more mellowing out. You'll find time for more times to listen to peaceful music. That's what we have to look for in the spiritual life, not this sense of force. Can we get into our unconscious and change and totally detach all those authoritarian figure interactions we had when we were younger? My personal feeling is I think it's next to impossible. But what we can do is we can detach ourselves from that so we aren't enslaved and start the same kind of instant reaction to when we're wanting to do some self-discipline. Because I think really to all of us, discipline has discipline. I mean, it's not a very exciting word, to put it mildly. It's work, and it goes back to past instances really when we were all growing up and having our parents really urge us along. Importantly, it's not an accurate necessarily or objective memory of what happened, but in the long run, really what difference does it make? It's the memory that's there, even though it's our kind of distorted memory. And we have to work with it. We work with it by understanding how it's still around, influencing our life, and slowly detaching from it. Not getting mad for how it still activates, for when these associational tapes play themselves back again and again. But understanding and then that it's really us. It's not the authoritarian figures. It's not the discipline. It's not the situation. It's an old conflict in us that we no longer have to externalize and we can step back from, so it doesn't have to continue to influence our life so strongly. Well, what I'd like to do is maybe to take a few moments to be able to chant together with you with some music, to be able to chant the mantra. And let's see if we can find, not instill into ourselves, but what's more accurate in the spiritual way, we really find the feeling. We don't have to induce the feeling. Spiritually speaking, everything is in us already. Our enlightenment lies within us. The sense of self-awareness already lies within us. We don't have to force anything or make anything come from the outside. It's really already there. So maybe we can straighten our spines in a comfortable way, assume a comfortable posture, and chant for a few moments before concluding the meditation, and very much to let this feeling flow, to let this feeling come out. It will come out if we simply let it. So let's see if we can get in touch with that just for a few moments here this morning. Govinda Hare Murare He Natha Narayana Vasudeva Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Natha Narayana Vasudeva He Natha Narayana Vasudeva He Natha Narayana Vasudeva He Natha Narayana Vasudeva He Natha Narayana Vasudevam. Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Narayana Vasudeva. Shri Krishna Govinda Hare Murare He Narayana Vasudeva. 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 Kriyananda Natahamaraja Ki Jai. We affirm this feeling. Affirm that positive spiritual state. Remember that the religion is good. Kriyayoga is good. Buddhism is good. Christianity is good. World religions are good. Let that positivity flow. We have to remember not to work with ourselves, but to flow with ourselves. Not to force ourselves, but to flow. Only by working with ourselves will we find reasons to see spiritual lessons, to remember. This feeling will follow us then throughout the day. And we'll find reasons to learn spiritual principles in a very happy, positive, spontaneous manner. We'll find reasons to meditate. We'll find more moments to pick up spiritual books. We'll find more times during the day to take a moment to be quiet and to balance ourselves. That's what positive spiritual momentum is. And to conclude the meditation, the same concept as much better illustrated by Lord Krishna in talking to Arjuna. Keep head, trunk, and spine in a straight line. In stillness, the secret of self will unwind. Eyes closed, fixed on the bridge of the nose, maintain this steady yogic pose. Pledged to a vow of continence, remain calm, fearless, without variance. The mind brought under control and fixed on me is absorbed in samadhi and forever free. Namaste.